Hey guys, tonight we're not diving into battlefields or palace betrayals. Nope, tonight we're following a different kind of hero, feathered, fast, and surprisingly dependable. That's right, we're talking about birds. Not just any birds, though postal birds. Imagine, you're out on the vast Central Asian steppe, 1,000 miles from your closest neighbor, and the only reliable method of communication has wings. It sounds a bit like a fever dream, right? But it happened, and not just once or twice. Entire empires placed their trust in birds to carry messages, secrets, declarations of love, and threats of war. And you're here, cozy, probably under a blanket, trying to sleep, and now you're going to learn why some of the most powerful rulers in history once stared anxiously at the sky, waiting for a pigeon. And between the dust, the scorching sun, and the birds that sometimes forgot to come home, you'd never last a week out there. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like it, drop your current city and what time it is where you are in the comments. Always curious to see where you're tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You walk and walk. Dry grass crunches under your boots, brittle and sunbaked. The steppe is endless, like someone forgot to finish the rest of the map. Every so often, a gust of wind whips up dust devils that spin in the air and vanish just as quickly. This is ancient Central Asia, centuries before GPS, before Wi-Fi, before anyone could say, "Can you hear me now?" You're with a group of nomads, no fancy hats, no horses just yet, just a few tents, some goats, and the smell of wood smoke. They move with the seasons, south for winter, north for the spring. And you, lucky you, get to witness the moment someone first realizes that a bird might be better at delivering a message than a sweaty, overworked teenager. A boy appears no older than 12. His cheeks are red from the cold, his hands calloused from tending fires. He's holding something cupped between his palms. A bird, not just any bird, a rock pigeon, common now, but back then. It's like discovering email in a world still stuck with yelling across canyons. One elder, beard down to his chest and voice like gravel, nods approvingly. He ties a thin scrap of hide around the bird's leg, on it a message etched in tiny, careful strokes. Something about moving camp. Early, the bird takes off, wobbling for a second before catching the wind and soaring northeast. Get it to the cold camp before sundown, the elder mutters, and you think, wait, this is it. This is how it starts. Well, sort of. See, Central Asia wasn't just empty plains. It was a highway of empires. Sogdians, Parthians, early Chinese dynasties, they all crisscrossed these lands. Communication meant survival. But with no forests, no mountains to echo or conceal messages, the people here had to innovate. And birds were fast, hard to intercept, and surprisingly loyal. Well, most of the time, unless you forgot to feed them, then they'd just freelance for someone else. What's odd is how naturally it evolved. These early nomads didn't set out to invent a mail system. They just noticed that pigeons, especially ones raised in a single location, had this uncanny instinct to return home, like your cousin, who always moves away for college but ends up living down the street anyway. Some say it began with offerings, tying cloth strips to birds as blessings, then releasing them into the sky, a prayer on the wind. But prayers become gossip, and gossip becomes politics. That's when the idea sticks. You imagine it now. A chief pacing outside his tent, arms crossed, eyes darting between the horizon and the nesting basket beside him. The bird is gone. Message attached. If it reaches the northern camp in time, they'll delay migration. If not, the cattle freeze, and the children starve. No pressure, right? It's said that during a winter migration near Lake Balkh, a series of pigeons saved an entire caravan. A blizzard had cut off a path, but birds released from the leading groups carried warnings back. Reroutes were arranged, hundreds survived, and the birds, honored, fed dried mulberries, given names like Winter Flame and Breath of Wind. Some historians still debate whether those stories are just myth-making, but even now, in remote parts of Kazakhstan, families tell tales of the message birds that saved lives. And you, standing under that endless sky, feel it, that blend of superstition and practicality that soaks through history, like ink on felt. But it wasn't all majestic and noble. One nomad, known only as Old Crow, tried to train crows instead. Smarter birds, he argued. Better problem solving. But he forgot one thing. Crows are jerks. His postal squad routinely intercepted pigeon messages and brought them back only to shred them and hoard the ribbons. Like a gang of middle school bullies in feathers, the experiment was abandoned after one bird flew into a cooking fire mid-delivery. The message, still legible. It simply read, "Move the horses east." Short, sharp, and now barbecued. But still, every strange attempt taught them more. Which birds could carry weight, which returned reliably, which needed to be bribed with raisins. Trial and error, and sometimes error came with consequences. In one early case, a message announcing the birth of a con's heir never arrived. The bird, it turned out, had stopped mid-journey to roost in a merchant's grain silo. It stayed, gained weight, forgot its mission entirely. A proper little aristocrat, so they learned. Keep the birds lean, hungry enough to fly, but not so starved. They revolt, kind of like interns, really. And then came the baskets, woven from horsehair and reeds, mounted on poles or tucked inside tents. Birds weren't kept in cages, they were housed like guests. Each nomadic clan had its own bloodline of pigeons, trained from hatchlings. You didn't just borrow a bird, you borrowed trust, and trust was more valuable than gold out here. One chieftain reportedly declared that losing a bird was worse than losing a spear. A spear kills one man, he said. A lost message kills 100. Dramatic, sure, but accurate. As you sit there, probably hearing the faint whir of your ceiling fan, think about that. A civilization where your whole fate might depend on whether a 6-ounce bird with questionable motivation decides to follow through. Wild, right? But this was just the beginning, because as trade routes expanded, so did the need for speed. And the birds, they got upgrades, specialized training, exotic breeding lines, even tiny leather vests. Yes, tiny leather vests. We'll get there. But for now, you watch as another bird lifts into the sky. A tiny message bound to its leg, and 1,000 hopes bound to its wings. And, just like that, Central Asia begins to trust the wind. You barely blink, and the bird disappears into the sky. You squint up at it, wondering how it knows where to go. No compass, no map, just that weird pigeon intuition. And yet, the message will get there probably faster than you could. Even on horseback, the nomads figured that out early. But as the years passed and the empires around them grew teeth, that little trick of tying a message to a bird's leg became something more. It became infrastructure. It became policy. It became weaponized reliability. And you're standing right at the cusp of that transformation. The moment when birds stopped being cute sidekicks and started becoming state employees. Let's fast forward a little, not too far, just enough to smell incense on silk robes and hear the clink of gold coins in dusty marketplaces. You've entered Sogdiana Kingdom, wedged between Persia and China, a land of middlemen and multilingual scribes. Their cities, Samarkand, Bukhara, alive with trade. And trade needs coordination. Enter the birds, the Sogdians, always 3 steps ahead of their neighbors when it came to bureaucracy and gossip, decided to professionalize the whole affair. They didn't just tie messages to legs anymore. No, they developed full-on bird tech. First up, message tubes. Tiny cylinders carved from bone, hollowed reeds, even beeswax sealed, silver tubes for very important pigeons. These weren't just for style. Parchment could be fragile. Sandstorms, river crossings, overrigger beaks, any of it could ruin a message. So they started protecting the letters, wrapping them like little mummies before loading them into their pigeon mail tubes. Then came the bindings. Silk cords were the standard, dyed in different colors depending on urgency. Red, war; blue, trade; green, love letter; black, probably bad news or taxes. Sometimes the birds themselves were color-coded. Historians still argue about whether this was fashion, function, or just someone having too much free time. And the birds weren't just picked at random anymore. You had carrier birds trained in pairs, one that always flew east and one that always flew west. The Sogdians figured out that some pigeons had preferred directions, like that friend who insists they can only sleep on the left side of the bed. So they built rookeries, big ones, raised platforms outside cities, with open cages facing certain directions. The idea birds would always launch into their favorite path. No confusion, no detours, just aerodynamic efficiency and imperial dreams. You walk through one now. It smells like hay and guano and ambition. Birds shuffle and coo in their compartments. A scribe approaches with a rolled message sealed in red wax. He tucks it into a carved onyx tube, fastens it to a sleek grey pigeon's leg, and lifts it skyward. A single clap and it's off. No fanfare, no horn, just faith. Your move, Bactria. The scribe mutters. That message, it'll be in another city by nightfall. And if the bird doesn't make it, there's a second one, and a third. You'd think it was overkill. But this is the Silk Road. You can't afford to lose a shipment over a bird with stage fright. Now, not everyone loved this system. Some merchants complained about the cost. Training birds wasn't cheap, and neither was building avian post stations every 30 miles. But others swore by it. One trader even claimed he got word of a bandit ambush 2 days before his caravan hit the pass thanks to a message bird named Tariq, who flew through a thunderstorm to deliver the warning. A statue of Tariq was erected outside the city. It was a pigeon, made of bronze, wearing a tiny laurel crown. You can't make this stuff up. Well, actually you can, but some sources suggest it might be true. Historians still debate it, but here's the fun part. It wasn't just government folks or rich traders using these birds. The system was scalable. You, as an average citizen, could technically send a message if you had access to a rookery and a trained bird. Imagine standing in line at the bird office, cradling your wax cylinder like it's the last piece of cake at a wedding. You hand it off, watch the bird flap away, and then you wait. You wait a lot, actually. Bird mail wasn't instant. Weather mattered. Predators mattered. One overzealous hawk could take down 3 messages and a week's worth of strategy in a single swoop. In fact, there's a whole recorded incident, the affair of the 3 falcons, where rival city-states started weaponizing birds of prey to intercept enemy messages. Bird-and-bird warfare. Yes, it happened so. New strategies emerged. Decoy birds, birds with false messages, even birds with multiple messages, one real, one fake. Kind of like those spy movies where the agent eats the fake cyanide capsule and somehow walks it off. Some birds were even fitted with jingling leg charms to scare off smaller predators or just to let people know they were coming. Like a mail truck with wind chimes. You walk into a side alley now. Somewhere in ancient Panjkund, a woman is whispering to a bird in a basket. She ties a violet ribbon around its leg. The message folded into linen and perfumed. It's probably not state business. Maybe a rendezvous. Maybe a confession. Maybe just gossip. The bird flies, and you watch it vanish into the deep orange of a Sogdian sunset. What's strange is how deeply embedded birds became in the culture. There were poems written to pigeons, laws about their theft, even curses for people who sabotaged male birds punishable by exile, or, in one case, forced feeding of pigeon feed until the accused confessed. That one's debated, but colorful. No, still, like anything useful, the bird system started to be copied. Chinese envoys passing through took notes. Persian scribes sketched diagrams. Even rogue agents tried to train their own birds to imitate the system, leading to a minor scandal involving a dove that accidentally delivered the same message to 2 cities, sparking a minor border dispute. That bird, never seen again, probably laying low in some palm grove, sipping water and pretending not to have caused an international incident. But here's the deeper truth. One you're starting to feel now. It wasn't about the birds. Not really. It was about trust. You trusted that the bird would fly true, that the message would be read, that the answer would come. And in a world where travel took weeks, where news could die in a dust storm or be swallowed by silence, that faith meant everything. So the tubes got better. The training got stricter. Some birds were even rewarded with tiny silver tags when they completed 5 successful runs. There was pride, reputation, even competition. One report says a noble in Khiva tried to breed a pigeon line so fast it would arrive before you finished writing your reply. That didn't work, obviously, but it did lead to the world's most pampered flock, complete with miniature bathhouses and a grape-only diet. Of course it didn't help their flying, but hey, they looked great, and he was still standing in that alley, watching another bird take off. The world shifts slightly under your feet. You're realizing this isn't just a quirk of ancient logistics, it's a heartbeat, the flutter of wings that kept empires alive. You wake, or rather, drift into the next scene with the feeling that time has skipped, and it has. A couple centuries, give or take. The Sogdians have faded, absorbed into bigger, louder forces. The Silk Road pulses with even more travelers. Now, like an artery full of camels, whispers and tax collectors, and towering above this chaos is a new power, the Kushan Empire. You're in Bactria now, that stubborn sun-baked stretch of earth where empires come to prove themselves. And the Kushans, they're not messing around. They've got coinage, cavalry, Buddhist missionaries, and something new, an empire-wide statron avian postal system. Yes, it's official now. Government-employed birds. You stand at the edge of a high plateau near Kunduz. Below you, caravans crawl like ants. But your focus is higher on the rocky outcrop, where a man in uniform cradles a falcon. Not a pigeon, a falcon. And this is not your average message bird. This one wears a braided leather vest, embroidered in blue thread. Around its neck is a tiny brass tag, engraved with a sigil, 2 crossed arrows, and a flame. You don't know the exact meaning, but it definitely screams military clearance. The handler whispers something probably not sweet, nothing's, and releases the bird. It leaps into the wind, dives, then climbs again, cutting across the air like it's got a schedule to keep. And it does. This isn't just messaging, this is logistics. You're witnessing the first attempt at a bird-based rapid communication network across an empire. Not just short hops between tents, we're talking distances of 300 miles or more, high-stakes messages, border alerts, royal edicts, war declarations, and just beneath all that intensity, the same fluttering sound you heard on the steppe, back when it was just a nomad and a prayer. Here, in the Kushan system, the birds aren't pets, they're assets, bred and selected for endurance, speed, and navigational accuracy. The empire built falcon towers, stone spires with roosts and trained keepers dotting the landscape from Taxila to Termez. Every 50 miles, like ancient rest areas, but instead of vending machines, they had millet and bone services. One handler in Bamiyan was even known to sleep beside his favorite bird, he said. She dreamt of wind. Her name, Ashen, which means light breeze. She once completed a 200-mile message flight in under a day. Her reward, a sapphire ring for her keeper, and a poem sung in her honor. The bird, for her part, mostly enjoyed the millet, but not everything went smoothly. There was a scandal once. A falcon diverted from its path and landed on the wrong tower. Why? Because someone had trained it with incense. The bird followed the smell, not the coordinates. A courier from the eastern province used sandalwood oil on his gloves, and suddenly, birds were showing up where they weren't supposed to. One royal order to reinforce a northern border post never arrived. The outpost was overrun. The commander was executed. The message, found 2 weeks later in the rafters of a monastery, where the bird had gone to nap because the monks used the same incense during prayer. Whoops. After that, the Kushans outlawed scent training. All handlers had to wash their hands with neutral soap and wear unscented gloves. There were even inspections. One guy got demoted for using garlic oil near a rookery. Apparently, it confused 3 falcons and led to a food riot in the capital. But the idea caught on, not just with the Kushans. The Hephthalites, those enigmatic nomads who swept in, later took it a step further. They created dual-carrier birds, trained to recognize 2 destinations and fly between them alternately. One direction for messages, the other for replies. You stand in a training yard now. Gravel underfoot, mountain air slicing through your sleeves. Birds flap and wheel above as trainers whistle, raise colored flags, and click bone castanets. It looks like chaos, but somehow, they all know what they're doing. There's even a bird school. A literal bird school. You spot a wooden sign with carved glyphs. Proudly says something like Falcon Academy. Inside, nesting alcoves, obstacle courses, even little target perches where birds practice landings. One rookie falcon crashes into a practice drum. Everyone pretends not to notice, except one older bird who fluffs its feathers smugly. You get the sense it's seen some things. But here's the part that hits you hardest. These birds weren't just messengers. They were symbols. Royal seals featured wings. Oaths were sworn on feathers. The phrase "swift as Ashen" entered the language as shorthand for both efficiency and dependability, 2 things governments rarely pull off. The Kushans minted coins, with pigeons on one side and crowns on the other. The message was clear: our rule flies fast. And honestly, that's a better slogan than most empires get. But of course, politics being politics, not everyone played fair. There were rumors of birds being intercepted. Trained hawks used to snatch royal messages mid-flight. In one famous incident, a pigeon, carrying details of a border tax treaty, was caught, eaten, and partially digested before anyone realized what happened. The only reason the message survived, it had been rolled in wax and lodged so tightly in the leg tube that it passed through intact. Yes, the entire message was retrieved. The historian who recorded this politely referred to the recovery as unpleasant but informative. Even more concerning, the emergence of false birds. Traitors within the falcon handler ranks trained their own pigeons to mimic official routes, then swapped real birds mid-flight. One governor received what he thought was a royal pardon. Turns out it was a forged message written in poetic meter. He relaxed his defenses. He was beheaded 3 days later when the real order arrived. Historians still argue whether this was incompetence or sabotage, but the bird was never found. You sit now at the edge of a cushioned tower, legs dangling, wind tugging at your sleeves. You're watching the sun set over ridges that have seen more secrets than any archive. You're starting to understand what this all meant. The birds weren't just communication. They were reach. They were presence. A way for emperors to stretch invisible strings across mountains, deserts, and rivers, to pull distant provinces closer with nothing more than a whisper and a flap of wings. And you're still here, listening, letting that soft rhythm of history wash over you like feathers brushing your cheek. You blink and you're somewhere colder. The wind is sharper here, like it's trying to shave the skin off your cheeks. Snow crunches beneath your boots. You're high in the Tian Shan mountains now, and the birds, they're still flying, still working, still carrying the weight of empires. But this isn't Kushan anymore, or Hephthalite. This is China. More specifically, the western edge of the Sui dynasty, though it doesn't feel like imperial China. Not here. You're standing in a garrison town, half military outpost, half trading post, half frozen regret, that smells like horses, steel, and fear, because something's stirring beneath the silk robes and perfect calligraphy of the Sui bureaucracy. Power plays, whisper networks, a fragile alliance of generals who smile through their teeth and behind their backs. Send messages on the wind. Literally. You step into a long, low stone building. Torches sputter in sconces. Along the wall, cages, dozens of them. But no dogs, no hawks, just pigeons. Dozens of them, sleek and silent, with eyes like wet black marbles, each one tagged with a lacquered bamboo label. You read a few. Route for Land Prefecture, Winter Line, Pass Clearance, Private HRH, Prince Yang. You freeze at that last one, because this isn't state communication. This is private mail, and not just private clandestine. You're in the middle of a covert bird post station, hidden inside an outer defense post of the empire. Welcome to the world of royal side channels. Here's what happened. As the Sui emperors tried to centralize their power, regional princes and governors got twitchy. Border control was important, sure, but so was watching your back. In a world where one misplaced word could have you reassigned to snow patrol in the mountains, or worse, turned into a missing person in the ravine, communication was survival. But here's the rub. Official couriers could be intercepted, human messengers bribed, delayed, poisoned. It happened a lot. So the solution? Birds, fast, quiet, and loyal at least. More loyal than some distant cousin who smells opportunity like a wolf smells blood. Prince Yang of Qi, stationed in what's now part of Xinjiang, was one of the earliest high-ranking nobles to use his own pigeon fleet. He called them the Sky Ink. His palace scribes developed tiny, scroll-like letters, rolled so thin they looked like needles written on silk dipped in iron gall ink. Supposedly, you could write an entire treaty on something the size of a matchstick. You imagine him now, hunched in a pavilion, robes heavy with snowmelt, scribbling messages to his allies in Chang'an, not using the emperor's courier network, not trusting the palace riders, just releasing a bird from his tower and watching it vanish into the clouds like a secret prayer. It worked for a while. The messages were small, light, and usually flew at dusk when fewer patrols were active and shadows could be mistaken for birds of prey. His flock was so effective that one general once complained, "Prince Yang knows what I plan before I do." That general, mysteriously, disappeared 2 weeks later. The birds still flew. Of course, nothing this clever stays secret forever. Eventually, the court found out. Not directly because nobody ever confesses to unauthorized birding, but because the emperor's own message pigeons were being beaten, repeatedly. One scholar wrote, "How can the divine will of the Son of Heaven arrive later than the letter of a regional bureaucrat?" A very poetic way of saying, "Your Highness, they're faster than you." What followed was an imperial audit of all pigeon traffic in the western provinces. Yes, an audit. Of birds, it didn't go well. Handlers were terrified. Some tried to hide their flocks, others dyed the birds' feathers to pass them off as doves or free-range pets. There's one comical case of a local clerk who tried to disguise a message, "Bird as a roasted fowl," by gluing rice husks to its wings. The poor thing couldn't fly. It waddled out of the kitchen and was promptly arrested. But here's the twist. Prince Yang wasn't punished. Not directly. The emperor, rather than confront his ambitious relative, decided to absorb the network. He issued an edict making all unofficial bird posts into regional relay hubs under the imperial banner. A classic move. If you can't beat them, bureaucratize them. Overnight, all of Yang's birds became government property. All his trainers became imperial avian technicians, and the private secrets, well, they kept flying just under a different logo. You step outside now, into the bright sting of mountain wind. You see one of the former secret birds being released. A new ribbon flutters on its leg, yellow, the imperial color. But the message inside, probably still about troop movements, or rice tariffs. Or, more likely, who's planning to stab who with a smile. You wonder, did Prince Yang know he was being absorbed? Did he smile as the empire took his tools, knowing he'd planted birds in every tower, loyal only to him? Because some secrets don't fly straight. There's one tale half whispered, half sung about the wing that turned. A message bird that was trained to fly to roots, but one day went off course entirely, landing at a monastery in Dunhuang. The monks, curious, opened the scroll and found a poem written in couplet sex. When decoded, it revealed the names of 5 court conspirators. It was never meant for the monks. It was a mistake. Or, maybe not. To this day, no one knows if the bird turned on its own, or if someone tampered with its training. Historians are still debating it. One even suggested that birds could be conditioned with sound, 'cause meaning someone might have called it away with a flute tune. You lean on a low stone wall now, watching as snow starts to fall again. A young boy nearby is cradling a pigeon to his chest, whispering to it like a friend. You don't understand the words, but you understand the feeling. In a world ruled by politics, silence, and sudden disappearances, the sky becomes the only safe place for the truth to travel. And you're still here, listening, watching, learning how empires rise, not just on armies or taxes, but on whispers tied to feathers. You're standing in the heart of a camp that doesn't sleep. The firelight flickers across blackened iron pots and bloodied saddles. Drums beat like the heartbeat of something ancient, something immense. You're in Mongolia now, early 13th century, and everything around you hums with the quiet terror of discipline. This is no ordinary encampment. This is the war camp of Temujin, soon to be known across continents as Genghis Khan and his empire. It's growing like wildfire. You thought bird messaging reached its peak with the Sui or the Kushans, that it had evolved into something refined, bureaucratic, and elegantly efficient. Forget all of that. You're in the empire of the horse, the bow, the scream across the plains, and even Hiravan birds carry the weight of war. Not pigeons this time. Hawks, eagles, falcons, creatures of the hunt, and yet also creatures of communication, because the Mongols don't see a difference between war and message. For them, every feather is a blade, every wing beat, a command. You pass through the center of the camp, past a row of yurts flapping in the bitter wind. A boy no older than 12 is wrapping something into a leather cylinder, tiny and stained with wax. He moves quickly, his eyes darting toward a looming figure in the shadows. A general, perhaps, or a Khan of one of the lesser clans. Either way, the message is urgent, and the bird it's strapped to is a falcon, pale and furious, its wings twitching with energy. Its chest heaves like it wants to leap and strike something, even if that something is the sky itself. The boy nods once, releases it, it vanishes. You feel the gust of air from its wings before the cold rushes in again. Here's how it worked. The Mongols, despite their terrifying land speed and legendary mounted messengers, the YAM system still found value in birds for certain missions. Messages that had to cross rivers or mountains. Commands that couldn't wait for horseback riders. Secrets too delicate for human lips. Some scholars argue this is where the myth of the imperial wind riders began. Birds, specially bred and trained to return to only one hand, no matter where they were released. That hand belonged to one man, the Khan. You picture Genghis himself, seated in his felt-lined gear, eyes like obsidian stones, watching as a hawk wheels down from the clouds and lands, without hesitation, on the wrist of his falconer. No sound, just the rustle of feathers and the crackle of something inevitable. The message is removed, read. Perhaps a report from a general in the Hindu Kush. Perhaps a request for more arrows from the Western Front. Perhaps something darker like a list of towns to be spared or erased. No courier would be faster. No courier could be trusted not to flinch. But here's the fun detail. The Mongols didn't just use birds, they studied them. You're ushered now into a tent filled with scrolls, bones, feathers, and diagrams. Falcons dissected, mapped, understood. Mongol naturalists, yes, they existed, documented ideal flight patterns, wind sensitivities, even emotional triggers. They believed falcons had temperament tides, times of day when the bird's spirit was more aligned with the wind, making it more obedient. Messages were timed accordingly. If you sent a bird too early in the morning, they said, it might just change its mind halfway and go look for a mate instead. Sounds silly. Tell that to the entire regiment. That didn't get its repositioning order because one bird got distracted and ended up mating with a barn owl near Samarkand. Yes, that happened. The owl was reportedly unimpressed, so new rules were drawn. Falcons were rotated between missions, sent on practice flights to keep their focus sharp. Some birds were even fitted with bells to alert the camps as they approached, though this made them easy targets for enemies who'd learned to listen for the jingling sound of Mongol decisions. Yes, the enemies. Turns out, Mongol birds were so legendary that rival empires began counter-training interception birds. A Persian emir once paid a whole village to raise hawks trained specifically to attack falcons wearing Mongol tag cords. One such interception changed the course of a small war. A message meant to halt a siege outside Tabriz was intercepted and never delivered. The besiegers, not receiving the retreat command, pushed forward. The city fell, and the emir commissioned a golden statue of the hawk, who ate the orders of war. The Mongols never forgave that village. But here's the thing. Most of these birds didn't fly solo. They flew with men. You're on horseback now, galloping beside a courier with a falcon hooded on his shoulder. This is the hybrid method. The message carried redundantly by both rider and bird. If the man fell, the bird flew. If the bird was lost, the man kept riding. It was redundancy, Mongol style, brutal, elegant, and really, really hard on the birds, but some of them thrived. One hawk, named Shara, reportedly flew from Bukhara to Karakoram across over 1,200 miles in 6 days. The story goes, she arrived with a broken wing and still landed perfectly on the Khan's wrist. He wept. Or so the story claims. What we do know is that Shara was buried with a military-grade saddle bell, and to this day, some herders in western Mongolia say they still hear her bell on stormy nights, ringing through the clouds. Whether it's true, who knows? But it's the kind of story the steppe loves. There's another tale, this one almost certainly exaggerated, about a night when 6 birds were sent to 6 different generals with the same command. Do not move. Only 5 messages arrived. 1 bird disappeared entirely. The 6th general attacked. It triggered a 3-week internal war between Mongol vassals. When the missing bird was eventually found, dead in a ravine with its message still attached, the paper soaked through from rain, it was too late. Villages had burned, allegiances shattered. That bird mummified, buried with military honors, posthumously, blamed for nothing and everything. You sit now beside a fire, the wind howling past the tent flaps. Across from you, an old soldier is tossing scraps of dried meat to a falcon perched nearby. He's speaking in low tones, almost cooing. Birds are loyal, he says, without looking at you. More than men, a man can be bought. A bird only wants to return. And you get it now. For the Mongols, birds weren't just tools. They were proof of the Khan's reach. Proof that no matter where you ran, no matter how far you rode, the sky itself might deliver his voice to your shoulder. Soft, silent, final. You glance up, just in time to see another falcon wheel overhead. No sound, just shadow on snow. You're still on the step, but the mood has shifted. The air is heavy, not with smoke or war drums this time, but with argument, not loud, not angry, just competitive. You feel it the way you feel, thunder coming quiet, tension, everyone speaking a little faster than they should. You're in the city of Samarkand now, centuries after the Mongols, during the glittering geometric peak of the Timurid Empire, and tonight, the empire is obsessed with one very specific question: which is faster, message bird or a camel courier? Yes, that's a real debate. Heated, passionate, petty. You're sitting in a tea house near the Registan Square, nursing something warm and probably bitter, when a merchant slams his cup down and declares that his dromedary courier made it from Balkh to Herat in 2 days flat, and he had dysentery. Across from him, a court scribe, wearing too much perfume, snorts into his sleeve. Please, he says, your camel would lose to my pigeon even if it had roller skates. Laughter bets. Someone calls for a judge, and somehow, as the evening stretches on and shadows pool in the corners, the scribe and the merchant start planning something bigger. A race. No, not just any race. The race. Bird versus camel. Message versus muscle. Wings against humps. You're there when it happens. Dawn breaks over the walls of Samarkand like spilled gold. A crowd gathers along the old caravan road, traders, soldiers, kids chewing sticks of honeyed fig. The sun is barely up, and already the tension hums. 2 platforms are set. One holds a pigeon, sleek, silver-feathered, wearing a tiny silk tube on its leg. The other, a muscled camel, eyes bored, chewing like it's just waiting for someone to ask it to do something stupid. A judge holds up 2 messages identical. A short, diplomatic line. By order of His Majesty, all envoys to Isfahan must bear fresh mint, because apparently even royal tea service is a matter of empire. The crowd quiets. The scribe releases the pigeon with a flourish. It shoots into the sky like a dagger of light. A beat later, the camel handler yells, and the beast lurches forward, kicking up a spray of dust as it gallops into history. Now you're in 2 places at once. Above, the pigeon cuts through the morning air, tail twitching as it finds its current. Below, the camel thunders across the plain, bells jangling, hooves pounding a rhythm older than language. It's absurd, glorious, hilarious, and kind of beautiful. You flash forward. The message arrives in Isfahan. The pigeon lands at a rooftop post perch, cooing softly. A handler removes the note. Time of arrival: just past the 6th prayer of the day. The camel arrives 3 hours later. The merchant is devastated, claims the wind was unfair, accuses the pigeon of riding a thermal current. Cheating, he calls it. The judges disagree. The pigeon wins. But here's the twist. The empire learns from this. The race was ridiculous. Yes, but it proved a point. That, under the right conditions, avian messaging wasn't just faster, it was more efficient, cheaper, less prone to accidents, and, let's face it, easier to feed. So, the Timurids adapt. Suddenly, official bird lines are reactivated. The old Mongol towers are refurbished. Maps are redrawn to include airpaths. Pigeons become a standard feature at every military outpost. And City Hall, couriers are still used, sure, but birds become reliable redundancies. A term emerges, feather echo. It refers to any message sent twice, once by courier, once by bird. If both arrive with the same content, it's verified. If they don't, someone's lying. You're standing in a records hall now. A scholar compares two scrolls, one hand-delivered, one air-milled. He frowns. The handwriting is different. The seal on the courier version is smudged. He stamps the bird version and shoves the other into a fire pit without ceremony. Just another day. Of course, there are failures. Always. One bird trained for long-haul flights gets confused mid-journey and starts flying in circles over a town for 2 days. Locals call it the bureaucrat. It refuses to land, drops the message in a well out of spite, then flies home and pretends like nothing happened. Another bird falls asleep on a monastery bell and sets off a false alarm, causing a minor military skirmish that burns down 3 barley silos. But overall, the system works. The empire becomes a symphony of silence, messages flitting across the sky, barely noticed. Officials start calling it the Whisper Network. Not because it's secret though, it often is, but because it's everywhere, invisible, like breath on glass. Still, The camel lovers don't go down without a fight. A group in Nishapur starts breeding smaller, faster camels, sprint camels. They dress them in silk vests and dye their ears blue. The whole thing feels like a desperate publicity stunt. Birds continue to win. You sit now on a rooftop, watching the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in apricot and ash. A lone pigeon swoops by, casting a shadow on the scroll in your lap. You imagine what it must have felt like to live in a time when news rode the wind, when love letters and death orders and mint tea policies all flew side by side, carried by something smaller than your hand. And maybe, just maybe, you understand the merchant a little better now. It was never just about speed, it was about connection. And for one brief moment in Samarkand, bird and beast raced across the dust, and the empire listened. You're not in a palace tonight, not in a garrison, not even a bustling caravanserai. You're in a quiet tent somewhere on the steppe round, warm, perfumed with cedar smoke. Outside, the grass rustles under moonlight. Inside, a man reads the sky through the silence. He's a diviner, a seer, the kind of figure who speaks softly and somehow makes everyone listen. And tonight, he's watching birds, not because he likes them, though he does, but because he believes they know the future. Yes, welcome to the part of our story where the lines between communication, belief, and paranoia blur like ink in water. Because for many centuries across Central Asia, messages didn't just travel by bird, they were interpreted by bird. You sit cross-legged across from him now. The walls of his yurt are covered in feathers, bones, wind chimes, and scrolls tied with red twine. On the central table is a large clay bowl filled with ashes and a single pigeon feather, perfectly still. You sent the message, he asks without looking at you. You nod. He closes his eyes. Which direction did the bird fly first, true north or slightly eastward? You blink. You hadn't noticed. He sighs. The bird's path affects the outcome. If it tilts west, the message will face delay. If it tilts east, truth will fly faster than betrayal. You resist the urge to ask if that's a proverb or just something he made up because it sounds cool. But this is real. Or, at least, it was real to them. For centuries, messengers, generals, even khans, consulted sky readers before releasing a message bird, not just to predict the weather, but to divine intention, omen, luck. Was the timing auspicious? Was the message cursed? Would the bird be intercepted? Was the recipient in danger? These weren't idle worries. This was a world where bad timing could doom a treaty, where a 3-day delay could mean a rebellion. So the flight of a bird, its arc, speed, height, and landing, became part of the message itself. You recall a story now, told to you earlier in the ruins of Merv. A prince once released a falcon carrying a marriage proposal. The bird, strong and sure, soared upward, and then dropped from the sky mid-flight. Heart attack, hawk strike, lightning. No one knows. But the marriage never happened. The bride-to-be was found poisoned 3 nights later. The prince never married. Again, coincidence? Maybe. But tell that to the court astrologer who refused to eat poultry ever again. The tent you're in now belongs to one of the more respected bird interpreters in the Timurid courts. His name is Saif al-Din, though people mostly call him Old Wind. He's been consulted by generals before battles, ministers before speeches, even poets before recitals. And always he begins by watching the birds. He points now to a painted scroll behind him. On it, 12 common bird flight patterns, each with a symbolic meaning. Upward spiral equals news will be well received. Sudden dive equals secret will be betrayed. Looping flight equals the sender hesitates. Circle, then dart equals a lie is carried. You wonder if some of this is just superstition layered over anxiety. But then again, maybe anxiety needs superstition to survive. You lean in closer as he shows you another pattern, the twin path. According to Saif, when 2 birds are released with mirrored messages, the one that arrives first is the truth, and the second is the spin. This was how one sultan determined whether a border governor was telling the truth about grain shortages or just hoarding supplies. Spoiler, he was hoarding. The second bird arrived 5 hours later, after the bribe had been intercepted. But not all predictions went smoothly. There was a now infamous event called the Stuttered Sky, where 3 message birds released by different factions in Bukhara all failed to arrive. One got shot by a hunter, one was caught by a falcon, One, it never left the cage. The handler forgot. The next week, a fire swept through the central market. Some blamed divine wrath. Others blamed poor planning. Sayf. Aldin blamed the bad triangle, a rare sky alignment, that he said disrupted bird paths. Historians still debate that one, especially the part where he predicted the fire. Here's the thing though. None of this was considered strange back then. Even scientific thinkers of the time, astronomers, philosophers, doctors, acknowledged the spiritual dimension of messaging, not because they were gullible, but because the stakes were high. And birds, while birds were unpredictable, you step outside now. The sky is a blur of stars. Cold light spills across the hills. Somewhere nearby you hear a wing beat. You look up a message bird. You can tell by the way it flies straight, steady, low to the horizon. It's flying west. Someone out there is waiting. Someone here has hope. Sayf. Aldin joins you, hands tucked into his sleeves. She will arrive before dawn, he says, and he will believe again. You don't ask who he's talking about. Sometimes the story doesn't need your name, but here's what lingers. For these people, birds weren't just couriers. They were signs, dreams, extensions of fate, a treaty signed on the wing, a life balanced on a feather. And you're still here, listening, wondering if maybe, just maybe, the truth sometimes does come from above. It's quiet, too quiet. You're in a palace courtyard this time, all cut stone and soft water fountains. It should be peaceful, but there's something off, a tension you can't name. The wind's blowing just a little too hard, the shadows just a little too long, and there perched on the parapet is a pigeon. Nothing strange, right? Except it's not moving, not blinking, and when a guard walks past, the bird doesn't flinch. You look closer. That bird is fake, and you've just stepped into one of the most bizarre, delightful, and slightly terrifying chapters in the long, fluttering history of Central Asian mail. The era of decoy birds. Spies had always been part of the equation. You knew that, but what you didn't know is that espionage, when married to creativity, sometimes grows feathers. It all began during the Abbasid Caliphate's reach into Central Asia, when Baghdad wanted ears in places their armies hadn't quite secured. It wasn't enough to bribe officials or intercept human messengers. No, someone had a better idea. Why not infiltrate the bird network itself? You're standing now in a shadowy workshop somewhere near Merv. It smells like wax, cedar, and desperation. A man sits hunched over a table, carefully gluing feathers to a carved wooden pigeon. Next to him, tiny brass hinges, miniature ink reservoirs, and what looks suspiciously like a wind-up spring mechanism. He's building what the Abbasids called a rasul, the IFAA, a false messenger, a spy bird, a puppet with a purpose. The idea was, as wild as it was effective, if you could launch one of these decoys at just the right time, in just the right direction, you could intercept a rival's bird in midair, confuse it, or even lure it toward your camp. One version included a light scent trail ambergris, oiled to distract scent-trained birds, but the more devious models, they weren't just lures, they were collectors. Tiny hooks on their legs would snag message tubes mid-flight. One even had a pouch designed to catch droppings. Droppings because certain kingdoms encoded messages inside digestible wax pellets, training birds to expel secrets at arrival points. You can't make this up. One decoy bird allegedly intercepted 4 messages from a Persian outpost in 2 weeks. The letters were decoded, copied, and then reinserted into the birds, who were then gently released to continue their journey as if nothing happened. Talk about reverse pickpocketing. You're ushered now into a hidden room behind a stable. 2 men are hunched over a table covered in shredded parchment. A third is carefully sewing a message back together using strands of horsehair. They work by candlelight, whispering instructions, wiping sweat from their brows. The message, something about grain tariffs. Boring, except in the margins, coded in alternating diacritical marks, is a list of names. 5 merchants, 1 governor, 1 general. They were being watched, and they didn't know it. This little operation became so successful that it developed its own slang. In court circles, feeding the bird meant planting false information, clipping a wing meant intercepting a message, finding the egg meant discovering a hidden meaning in an otherwise dull letter. But not everyone was amused. One regional lord who fancied himself an amateur poet discovered that all his love letters had been read. copied, and passed around in a Baghdad coffeehouse. Apparently, his rhyming was so bad it became a meme. His revenge. He trained a bird to carry nothing but insults, written in increasingly flowery verse, to whoever was intercepting him. One scroll read, "May your falcons molt in shame, and your spies forget which end is up." The recipient responded with a limerick of their own. It got out of hand. But not every prank ended in verse. One of the most notorious incidents was the affair of the third bird, which brought down an entire royal household. Here's what happened. A message urgent was meant to be sent in triplicate. 3 birds, 1 message each, carried along different routes. This was standard practice to ensure at least one message arrived safely. Bird 1 arrived early. So did bird 2. The messages matched, an order from the crown to delay troop movement near the Caspian border. But the third bird never came. At first, no one questioned it. 2 out of 3 was good enough. The order was followed. Troops delayed. And then, weeks later, bird 3 finally showed up, stumbling, malnourished, almost dead. The message it carried. A different order entirely. Advance, not delay. The seal was identical. The handwriting matched. Panic ensued. Was the third bird forged? Was one of the others fake? Who tampered with which? Whispers swept through the court. Within days, 2 ministers were arrested, a general was exiled, and a prince mysteriously fell ill after accidentally ingesting pigeon feed laced with ground opium. The truth, still debated. Some say the third bird was legitimate and the first 2 were part of a coup. Others believe the entire thing was a setup, a test of loyalty. One theory suggests all 3 messages were real, but the king was playing factions against each other to see who cracked first. It worked. They all cracked, and you sit beneath a date tree now, watching a real pigeon flesh and feather circle the courtyard. It lands beside you, blinking slowly, puffing its chest. You almost laugh. How could something so small cause such chaos? But that's the thing. In a world of secrets, the tiniest courier is the perfect cover. You don't look twice at a bird in flight, and that's how they get you. You wake to the scent of roses. Not the cloying perfume of oil-drenched petals. Real roses, fresh, dew-laced, growing wild on a hillside somewhere in the Fergana Valley. The air is soft here, less sharp. It smells like longing, and that's exactly where you are, somewhere between history and heartache. Because tonight, you're not watching war unfold or empires expand. You're watching a love story, and like all great love stories in ancient Central Asia, this one begins with a bird. You're sitting at the edge of a lush garden. The year is haziest somewhere in the 9th century. The trees are heavy with fruit, and the grass is so green it almost hums. In the shade of a cypress, a young woman in silk sits with a pigeon in her lap. She's tying a message to its leg. Her fingers are careful, delicate, not like the scribes you've seen before. This isn't an order or a command. This is something else entirely. This is a secret. Her name is Samira. She's a princess of the Karloks, kept behind walls tall enough to blot out half the sky. Her days are arranged like fine porcelain morning prayers, lessons in Persian verse, quiet meals with too many attendants. Her nights, filled with dreams she can't tell anyone, except one person, a young officer named Tamar. And how do they speak? Birds. You can almost feel the moment it began. A single glance in the spice market, an accidental brush of fingers, a letter tucked under a saddle. And then the first bird sent with a scrap of poetry, trembling ink, and more risk than it deserved. They should have stopped there. They didn't. The pigeon in Samira's lap is called Rahila, meaning she who departs. It's flown this path before across the valley, over the river, past the orchard where Tamar drills the local militia. He's not nobility, he's not rich, but he writes like he knows what silence feels like. And that, for Samira, is enough. She whispers something to Rahila, nonsense, maybe, a blessing, a goodbye, then lifts her to the sky. The bird flies, and with her goes a verse. I saw you in the shadow of a pomegranate tree. My heart, untrained, tried to follow. You exhale, because you already know where this is going. For months, the messages continue. They develop code colors on the string, wax marks, flight times. A morning flight means I miss you. An evening flight means I need to see you. A bird that lands twice before flying means it's not safe right now. It's absurdly delicate, almost cinematic. You find yourself rooting for them. But then comes the sandstorm. It arrives fast and seasonal, cruel. You see it now through Tamar's eyes. standing in the orchard, watching the sky turn from blue to ochre in seconds. He runs for cover, shouting to the men, to the handlers, to anyone who might be listening. But it's too late. Rahila is already airborne. She's caught mid-flight, tossed like a scrap of paper, battered by wind and dust and thunder. She disappears into the storm. The message never delivered. Samira waits 3 days. No reply. On the 4th day, she sends another pigeon, then another. Each one returns without a response, and on the 6th day, she receives a message, but not from Tamar. It's from the palace watch captain. A bird was found at the edge of the city, injured, confused, message tube still attached. The message was intercepted and decoded. And now Samira is confined. The garden is closed. The windows are shuttered. The pigeons confiscated. The head falconer is arrested. Tamar is declared a traitor and vanishes. Whether he fled or was taken, no one knows. The official story: he was reassigned to a border outpost. The unofficial one: he's buried somewhere beneath that same orchard, under a stone with no name. But Samira, she doesn't cry, not where people can see. Instead, she carves tiny symbols into the wall of her chamber. Bird tracks, feather marks, tiny wings. She whispers stories to herself at night, not prayers, not poetry, just memories, preserved like dried petals between pages. And she survives, found weeks later, nesting in a ruined watchtower. Someone takes her in, feeds her, trains her again, but she never flies quite the same. Her routes are erratic now, unpredictable. She starts returning to Samira's garden at odd hours, even after the guards had changed. One day, a scribe new to the palace fiends, a feather on the ledge of the west tower, wrapped around it, a scrap of silk, no writing, just a familiar perfume. He says nothing. Some say Rahila kept flying for years, that Samira trained others, that somehow her messages found their way into songs, coded verses, sung by market girls, repeated by shepherds, passed down like folklore. One of them ends like this: and though the sky forgot your name, the birds still carry your breath. You sit quietly now, the roses rustling beside you. Maybe it was just a love story. Maybe it was a whisper too bold for its own time. But in a world of cold logistics and sharp ink, a message of longing once flew on warm wings, and that, somehow, makes all the rest worth telling. The desert doesn't whisper tonight, it screams. Wind howls through the dunes like it's trying to peel the world clean. Sand pelts your cloak, gets between your teeth, your thoughts. You squint toward a faint flicker of torchlight ahead. A ridge, a tent, a gathering of soldiers, and one hunched figure, cradling something limp and feathered. The bird is dead. You step closer, boots crunching in the dry crust of wind-hardened dust. The man doesn't look up. He's unwrapping a scroll from the bird's leg with shaking fingers. The wax seal, broken. The ink, blurred. The message, too late, and somewhere not far from here an army has already begun to march in the wrong direction. This is the disaster everyone feared but few prepared for. A message, bird intercepted, or worse, taken down mid-flight. You're standing at the edges of the city of Balkh. Around the year 1113, the Seljuk Empire is fracturing. Factions are forming. Alliances shift like dunes in a storm. Every general wants to outmaneuver the others, not just on the field, but in the air. And suddenly, birds are no longer just couriers, they're targets. The story you've just stepped into is known somewhat dramatically as the arrow and the whisper. It starts with a routine message, nothing extraordinary. A strategic redirection of cavalry. Near the northern gorge, the general in Balkh, methodical, prone to ulcers, sends it via pigeon. The bird lifts off. 30 miles into its flight. As it crosses a ravine, a young shepherd on a nearby ridge sees it, sees the glint of brass on its leg, knows what it means. And, because sometimes history pivots on the weirdest of whims, he draws his bow, aims, and fires. The arrow strikes, the bird falls, and the message, unsent, undelivered, unheard. That shepherd becomes an accidental footnote in a much larger catastrophe, because when the message doesn't arrive, a flanking unit never moves. The siege begins too soon. Supplies don't arrive. The enemy, thinking they've outmaneuvered the Seljuks, pushes forward and they're right. The Seljuk line breaks, a city burns, and all because of a bird. That didn't make it. You sit by the fire now with the remains of the pigeon laid carefully across a scrap of silk. A scribe is trying to reconstruct the letter, holding it up to the flame light, praying for legibility. The generals argue behind you. One insists this is sabotage. Another believes it's a curse. A third just wants to ban bird messengers altogether. Let the camels do it. At least they don't fly into arrows. But that's not the solution they settle on. The next day, the empire initiates a sweeping reform of the avian post. First, all messages must be sent in duplicate, one bird, one courier. Second, birds must now fly at night, when visibility is low and archers can't easily track them. Third, pigeon escorts are less valuable birds trained to fly alongside the real messengers and draw any potential attacks. Yes, decoy birds. You imagine a poor falconer explaining this to his boss. Sir, the plan is to surround the important pigeon with 3 dummy pigeons, flying in a V formation, like a feathered bodyguard unit. Exactly, my lord, the secret flock. It's ridiculous. And yet, it works most of the time. But soon, the other side adapts. They begin training archers to spot the tight flyer, the one bird that doesn't veer when startled, the one flying steady, purposeful, like it knows it's carrying something weightier than instinct. So more changes come. Messages are shortened to single glyphs, like passwords, or they're split half on one bird, half on another. Only together do they make sense. One diplomat even develops a cipher based on bird feather. Count, you had to pluck a certain number of feathers to reveal the real code. That one, thankfully, didn't catch on. Too many saw birds. You shift now to a different city here. You're watching an archery tournament. Crowds roaring, banners snapping. But instead of paper targets, small wooden silhouettes of birds are suspended on ropes. It's not just sport, it's training. Because by this point, every army knows the air is a battlefield. 2. One commander goes as far as building falcon blinds along the mountain paths, high stations where trained lookouts watch for messenger birds and attempt to intercept them with hunting hawks. Success rate, low, but when it works, it really works. There's one infamous case where a hawk not only caught the messenger bird, but also returned it alive, scroll intact. The hawk's name, Dust Eater. The intercepted message, a ceasefire request. It was never delivered. The war went on for another 6 months. Still, not every loss was sabotage. Sometimes birds just fail. They get lost, distracted, eaten. One pigeon, tasked with delivering a list of tax adjustments, reportedly turned up 6 years later in a baker's chimney. The message had long since faded. The pigeon, thriving, fat, possibly employed as a local mascot. Another time, a pigeon made it all the way to the correct city, then landed on a statue and refused to move. The message remained unread for a week, until a kid threw a rock at it and revealed a command that should have been enacted immediately. After that, birds were trained to land only on specific tuned bells, a sound cue that lured them to the correct platform. It helped, mostly but the damage from the arrow and the whisper lingered. That one bird's death became legend. Artists painted it, poets wrote about it, philosophers debated it. Can fate be undone by a feather? One scholar asked. Another replied, only if the feather carried the truth. You lie back now on the sand, wind humming low over the dunes. Overhead, a small shape flits through the moonlight. A bird maybe, a pigeon, maybe something else, flying silent, unannounced, carrying something only one person will ever read. And you're just here to witness it, to feel the weight of silence when a message goes undelivered. You wake to the scent of ink. Not fresh ink, the sharp, metallic smell of gall and soot. This is older, drier, the scent of messages, long sent and long forgotten. You're in a tower now, the walls lined with scrolls, scraps of parchment, wooden, tablets, even dyed strips of cloth, fluttering like faded prayer flags, and on every surface, symbols. Feathers drawn in profile, tiny wing-shaped glyphs, colored dots in strict arrangements, strings with knots, bones with notches. You've stepped into the world of bird code, because by this point in the long, winding story of avian messengers, writing alone wasn't enough. The messages had to be faster, smarter, harder to fake. In a world of interception, of betrayal and misdirection, every wing beat carried risk, so they got creative. And you're sitting in what was once a training room somewhere near Tashkent. It's the 13th or 14th century, and the Timurid court is obsessed with one thing above all: secrecy. Not just what the message says, but how it says it. how it's packaged, hidden, masked, and most importantly, how it's understood. You pick up a scroll near your knee. It looks ordinary until you hold it to the light. Faint traces of lemon juice, invisible ink, a message revealed only by warmth. Next to it, a wooden ring carved with 3 symbols, a crescent, a claw, a WINGTIP. Code. That ring is the reader key. Without it, the message on the accompanying bird written in matching glyphs is gibberish. Only those who know the cipher, who wear the ring, can decode the truth. You run your finger along a carved panel on the wall, tracing the outlines of flight indicators, the ancient equivalent of postal labels. A red wax seal with 3 indentations meant urgent, eyes only. A green cord knotted thrice meant agricultural data. A tiny blue bead tied near the bird's ankle meant medical emergency. A single black feather affixed to the bird's back, that one, meant kill the messenger. Literally, the bird was never supposed to return. This wasn't just messaging, this was language. You flip through a ledge, its edges crisp from desert air. On one page, a full chart of what historians now call avian code sets. There were dozens, maybe hundreds, depending on the region, the sender, even the bird breed. Yes, breed mattered. Some birds were trained to carry only a specific kind of message. Falcons for military code, doves for religious matters, pigeons for commercial trade. They were color-marked, set-coded, wing-trimmed, to signal their category. A general could spot a message type just by watching the way the bird flapped. No kidding, some commands weren't even written. They were carved into tiny pieces of wood, so the letters couldn't be altered. Others were braided into strings, in an early form of knot code. Historians now call it pre-keeper syntax, possibly related to Persian sailors, wrote lexicons. One messenger system in Khwarizm even used mirrored pairs, 2 birds launched with halves of a sentence. If one was lost, the other couldn't be read. Without guesswork, you had to wait for both to arrive or risk misinterpretation, which happened more than once. There's a recorded case of a battle that began too early because the second bird arrived 3 hours late. The first half of the message read, "At dawn, begin." The second half, negotiation with the emissary. You can guess how that went. You move now into the next chamber of the tower, a narrow corridor with niches carved into the wall. Inside each one, a preserved bird, taxidermied and tagged, like a museum of messengers. On their legs, you spot tiny scrolls, dried wax seals, and one bird wearing an actual bronze ring around its neck. You lean in to read the inscription. To deliver is to survive. To return is to witness. It's poetic and oddly chilling, because this wasn't just about sending letters. These birds were treated like witnesses, not carriers, proof that something was said, that something happened. A scent bird that never returned raised suspicions. A scent bird that returned too quickly raised alarms. There were even rumors that some birds were trained to circle 3 times before landing if their sender had died. Whether that's myth or not, the behavior was documented and taken seriously. One record from Bukhara tells of a bird that returned early, circling the palace tower again and again, refusing to descend. When it was finally captured and the message retrieved, it read, "They've poisoned the well. Tell no one, I'm already gone." The falconer, who had trained that bird from hatchling, wept when he read it. You sit on a bench now, surrounded by fragments of ancient intelligence. You think about how many messages were never decoded, how many were lost, misread, deliberately falsified, how many weren't meant to be understood, except by one person, because in the end, that's what all this was about. Connection, but also control, clarity, but also confusion when needed, trust, but never blind trust. And here, in this stone room filled with silent feathers, you understand something new. They weren't just training birds, they were training meaning, because in an empire of spies and shadows, nothing flies without a code. It's night, a quiet one, too quiet. The stars blink above you like old secrets refusing to die. You're in a desert valley now, deep within the borderlands between 2 once-allied tribes, the Ashtakonis and the Bayad. You're sitting by a dying fire, surrounded by silence that tastes like suspicion. And tonight, you're solving a mystery, because in the long storied history of birds carrying truth and lies across Central Asia, few tales ripple through time quite like this one. The story of the third bird. You don't start in the present, you start in the middle, a flashback. 2 noble families are teetering on the edge of war. Brothers once, enemies now. Tensions are high. Skirmishes are already breaking out along the borders, but cooler heads prevail for a while. Someone proposes mediation, a temporary ceasefire, brokered by a neutral noble, a simple agreement. Each side sends a message. 3 identical messages, one to the neutral broker, one to the rival clan, and one, just in case, sent to themselves. 3 birds, 3 messages, no room for error. You see the scene now. Cloaked scribes drafting letters under torchlight, guards watching over the pigeons as if they're carrying gold. The birds are fed, tagged, and launched at dawn from both sides, and for a moment, it works. Bird 1 from the Ashtakonis arrives at the Bayad camp by mid-morning. It carries the ceasefire terms. Reasonable, fair. The Bayad prince nods. Bird 2 from the Bayad's lands at the broker's estate just before noon. It confirms agreement. All seems well. Then comes bird 3, or rather doesn't. The Ashtakonis' third bird vanishes. Days pass. No message. No explanation. Then, almost like a cruel joke, the Bayad's third bird does arrive at the Ash camp, but the message inside is different. It's not a ceasefire. It's a demand, an aggressive one, bordering on threat. The language is unmistakably Bayad. The seal correct, the ink fresh, but the tone off. The Ashtakani prince reads it twice, 3 times, then he slams it down, calls it treachery, and orders troops to the pass. By dusk, the first swords are drawn, the truce collapses, and somewhere in the dry hills between their 2 fortresses, a third bird lies beneath a pile of stones, wings broken, scroll unread. You find it later, during the winter thaw. By then, the damage is done, but the scroll, still intact. You read it now. It's the original message, identical to the first 2. Polite, humble, signed with care. The war was a mistake, born not from betrayal, but from a bird that never arrived. You sit with that for a long time, but the mystery doesn't end there, because even now, scholars argue over what really happened. The scroll was eventually verified. The ink dated, the seal genuine, but questions remain. Why was the bird buried under stones? Why did the Bayad's third bird carry a different message? Some say it was a forged swap, someone within the Bayad ranks, trying to sabotage the peace. Others think it was an accidental scribe who grabbed the wrong scroll in the rush of morning. Still others whisper about a third party, a rising noble from the Khwarezmian borderlands who had everything to gain from a tribal war and the chaos it brought. His crest, a black-feathered hawk. No proof, no confession. Just a coincidence, or not. You walk now through the remnants of the war's aftermath, abandoned watchtowers, burnt grain fields, a half-collapsed rookery overgrown with weeds. The pigeon coops are empty. Cobwebs stretch where scrolls once hung. The air tastes of ash and what-ifs. You find a piece of pottery on the ground, a feeding dish for birds. It's been cracked in half, etched on the rim, barely visible. He who waits for the third bird must also wait for silence. A proverb, a warning, a joke. No one knows, but the phrase catches on. Over time, the third bird becomes shorthand for miscommunication, for systems that fail right when they matter most. In courtrooms, in poetry, even in love letters. One infamous breakup scroll from Samarkand simply read, "Don't be the third bird. Tell me what you feel, savage." You pause now beneath a dry fig tree where the last Ashtakani envoy was said to be buried. No ceremony, just a stone. No name. You watch the sky and wonder how many messages were lost like that. How many truths were never heard. How many lies were never corrected because a pigeon flew too slow, or too low, or not at all. Because in this world, this bird-born empire of trust and chance, sometimes the only difference between peace and war is who opens the scroll first, and sometimes no one does. You're in a courtyard again, but this one's different. Not military, not mercantile, not even administrative. This is a garden, a royal one. There's a fountain in the center, burbling softly, and citrus trees trained along the high walls. Jasmine climbs up the lattice. You hear the flutter of wings, the hush of silk. And somewhere inside the palace walls, the sharp click of gossip being born. You've arrived in the world of coded poetry by bird. You didn't think we'd get here, did you? You thought birds were just for treaties and troop orders, right? But no, this is the age when pigeons became something more than messengers. They became messengers of implication. It starts small, like all dangerous things. A short poem, 4 lines. delivered to the garden quarters of the Empress's sister. The bird lands delicately on a brass perch, shaped like a lily. A handmaid retrieves the scroll, unrolls it. It reads, "When the falcon bows to the wind, and the almond tree blooms too soon, beware the silence in the music." Some songs do not flatter the throne. A pleasant metaphor, an odd compliment, maybe, but if you know the court well, you know what it really means. The falcon is the general. The almond tree is the empress. The wind, the young concubine who's been visiting the strategy room too often. This isn't poetry. It's politics. And the bird that carried it, not a regular courier, a garden bird, small, white, trained to fly within palace walls, lands silently, and wait by the citrus tree until summoned. You walk now through the tiled paths of the imperial palace of Karasan. The walls are covered in glazed ceramics, blue and green and cream. Somewhere behind those windows, someone is reading a message not meant to be understood by everyone, because this is the golden age of suggestion as power. Historians now call it the verse years, a period when courtiers and officials wrote criticism, policy proposals, or outright accusations in the form of bird-delivered poetry. Why? Because you couldn't accuse someone of treason for a metaphor. And so the birds flew, from one tower to another, from one harem to another, from one jealous poet to a general's wife, carried not orders but tone. One particularly infamous example survives in a handwritten collection found centuries later. You read it now, lips curling slightly. They say the moon rises in the west now. Odd, since the sun still bows in the east. Should the sky choose a new emperor, would the stars even bother to object? The moon, a crowned prince. The sun, the reigning monarch. The author never confirmed. The fallout. Two royal cousins suddenly relocated to meditative exile in separate provinces. One of them suspiciously died from an excess of figs. You sit beneath a pomegranate tree now. A bird lands on your shoulder. Not a pigeon, something smaller, softer. It blinks at you. And you think, who decided to give wings to insinuation? It turns out, this wasn't just a poetic flourish. It was a system. There were scrolls written in code so dense only 3 people in the palace could decipher them. The calligraphy itself became suggestive, loops wider if the message was satirical, tighter if the warning was grave. Some scrolls had hidden ink, activated by citrus juice. Some were sealed with perfume that identified the sender without a signature. One sender was known only by a scent, like coriander and river moss. Her messages destroyed 3 couriers and got her appointed as provincial governor. No one ever saw her face. The empress eventually caught wind of these flying verses. Her advisors begged her to ban them. She refused. Instead, she joined in. Her first bird poem was sent to a military officer rumored to be aligning with a rival faction. It read, "Some birds sing sweet though their beaks are stained, some cages gilded, though the song is gone. Let the hawk remember, not every perch is permission." The next morning, the officer resigned due to health. The empress never confirmed authorship. And yet, the bird was seen leaving her tower. This mode of communication became so prevalent that it developed its own literary school. Beetlejuice, the House of Birds. Poets were trained specifically to craft messages with layered meaning that could flirt with a concubine, insult a vizier, and praise the empress in the same stanza. Birds became the Instagram DMIs of their time, private-coded, deniable, but also dangerous. Because one day, a poet got too clever. They sent a message to the wrong rooftop that it was meant for a court musician. It arrived in the hand of the Grand Vizier. The poem, suggestive, borderline treasonous, something about dancing while the empire burned. Within hours, the bird was caught. The poet interrogated. The musician, banned from the palace. The Grand Vizier, however, kept the scroll, framed it. A quiet reminder that feathers can slice as sharp as swords. You lean against a warm wall now, watching a pale grey bird circle overhead. You wonder, how many of those messages were ever truly understood? How many were written to be misunderstood? And how many fluttered, unopened, into history, tiny poems meant to change everything, but lost on the wind? The sky feels quieter now. You're standing on a rooftop, cracked tile beneath your feet. The wind still moving, but slower, like it's out of breath. Below, a city stirs with the usual rhythms, carts creaking through alleys, market stalls blooming open, the occasional clang of a blacksmith testing steel. But above, no birds, not the way they used to be. You're in Bukhara, sometime in the early 18th century. Once a hub of trade and scribes and fluttering wings, now caught between memory and momentum. Because what you're witnessing isn't just a moment in time, it's an ending. This is the slow, reluctant, inevitable decline of the bird post. It didn't happen all at once. No angry decree, no last flight, no funeral for a pigeon. Just change. Better roads, more riders, the printing press, armies with muskets and watches, messages that needed receipts, seals, signatures, things birds could never do. And so they were replaced, one by one. You walk past what used to be a state rookery, now converted into a granary. The perches are gone. The cages now hold sacks of barley. The air smells of dust and grain instead of feathers and ink. In the corner, you spot the last remnant, a small rusted bell once used to call trained pigeons home. It jingles faintly as you brush past it, like a whisper that forgot the words. People still remember, of course. You overhear an old merchant reminiscing as he haggles for saffron. Used to send a bird to Herat and hear back before my caravan even crossed the pass. Not like these couriers now, always asking for coin. He spits, not in anger, in nostalgia. You ask around, and you hear the same thing again and again. Birds were faster, simpler, purer, but also unreliable. One woman shrugs as she folds linen. I lost my wedding contract to a hawk once. Never trusted a feather again. And that's the heart of it, isn't it? Speed was never the whole story. Birds didn't give you proof. They didn't come with a signature or a stamped receipt. They couldn't confirm delivery or encrypt your message with anything but wax and hope. So, the world moved on. The Ottomans and Safavids standardized horse couriers. The Russians brought in trains and wires. The British Empire, ever fond of infrastructure, laid down post routes and printed schedules. And the birds, they became quaint. You're watching a public auction now. A man stands beside a row of cages, white pigeons cooing, blinking, shuffling in confusion. A sign reads, "Messenger birds, trained, decorative, healthy." Someone buys them for their garden. You feel that little twist in your chest. You wander out of the city, where the land stretches bare and soft again, to a quiet farm where an old man still keeps a few birds. He trains them like he always did, talks to them, releases one every Friday to fly to a friend's orchard, 40 miles away. He doesn't need to, he just likes the sound of wings coming home. They always come back, he says, even if there's nothing left to say. And maybe that's the saddest part. It wasn't betrayal or obsolescence or war that ended the bird post. It was silence. You think of all those centuries of generals pacing towers, lovers waiting in gardens, spies decoding flight patterns. You think of emperors holding out a gloved arm, waiting for an answer to land. And now people wait for carriages, for telegrams, for phones that ring in pockets. You look up at the sky again, that it's still vast, still blue, still filled with air and possibility, but it feels emptier. Because even though the birds still fly, they're not flying for you anymore, not for your secrets, not for your orders, not for your poems. They fly now only for themselves. You sit down on a warm stone and watch the horizon, and as the sun starts to dip, you think of one final scroll written by a retired court falconer, found decades after his death. I trained a bird to return to a hand that was no longer there. It circled for days. Sometimes I wonder if it still flies. Waiting. You close your eyes, the wind shifts, and you wonder what waits for you in the final part of this story. The sun is lower now, longer shadows, longer thoughts. You're on the move again, tracing the edge of a cliff overlooking the great steps. The grass bows beneath the wind, and you almost expect to see a bird cutting across the horizon, scroll, tied to its leg, flying like history still has somewhere to be. But there's nothing, only the sound of your own footsteps. This is the end, not just of your journey, but of an era, the final breath of a time when messages rode the wind and trust was feathered and fast. You're back where you began, in the heart of Central Asia. The land hasn't changed, still vast, still quiet, but the skies, they're different now. You pass the remains of an old bird tower, not a ruin, exactly, just forgotten. Ivy chokes the wooden frame, and a tree has grown through the middle. Nature, reclaiming bureaucracy. Inside, you find scraps, a broken perch, a rusted tag stamped with a crescent moon, and a rolled parchment that someone used to plug a leak in the roof. No message, just silence. You wonder what flew out of this tower last. A letter of war, of peace, of apology. Maybe nothing. Maybe the last bird just never came back. You walk past a school where children learn history from books, not birds. Past a farm where a shepherd waves, and his son flies a kite made from rice paper and twine, its tail fluttering like a forgotten scroll. No one here remembers the codes, not the feather counts, not the scent cues, not the red cord, not the green wax, not the delicate ritual of removing a message without frightening the wings it clung to. And that's okay, because, in the quiet corners of this land, the stories still linger. There's a bench outside a library in Samarkand where the pigeons gather every dusk. The elders toss seeds and whisper names of birds long dead. Shara Rahila, dust eater. They argue, half laughing, about which empire had the best system, which bird flew the furthest, which love letter caused the most trouble. It's not history anymore, it's memory, and you're part of it now. You've followed these birds from their first wobbly flights in the hands of nomads to the sharp, coded precision of empire. You've watched them carry lies and lifelines, watched them inspire lovers, terrified generals, ruin kings. And now you're watching them disappear into the past. There's a stone on a hill outside Bactrian, no inscription, no markings, just a hollow carved into its side, big enough for a bird to rest in. Local legend says the spirits of messengers perch there at night, waiting for scrolls no one sends anymore. Some say if you leave a note in that hollow, it'll disappear by morning, and if you're lucky, you'll hear wings just once. There are no scrolls tonight, only wind. But as you stand at the edge of everything, you close your eyes and imagine them anyway. A sky full of motion, tiny arcs, flutters, sudden dives, notes, traveling across time, not because they must, but because someone, somewhere, needed to believe they would arrive. And in that belief, hope, because that's what every message was, really. A question flung into the sky. Will this be understood? Will it reach them in time? Will they know what I meant? Even now we still ask those things. We just use different birds. Your feet are still, your breath soft. You've reached the final scroll, not with an answer, but with a knowing, a silence, full of wings. A story told not by kings or scribes, but by shadows in the sky.